Simone De Beauvoir was a French writer, intellectual existentialist, philosopher, political activist, feminist, and social theorist. At least that is how she is recognized now. In the beginning, she was known as a writer, teacher, and activist. Born January 9, 1908, Beauvoir was raised strictly Catholic. However, as an adolescent, she became an atheist and resolved to dedicate her life to the study of existence. Her father often proclaimed of his intellectual daughter, "Simone thinks like a man." These words encouraged her. When she was 21, De Beauvoir left home to attend the Sorbonne, where she studied philosophy and graduated in 1929. That same year, she took second place in the highly competitive philosophy aggregation exam, and barely losing to Jean-Paul Sartre, who took first. It was his second attempt at the exam. At 21 years of age, Beauvoir was the youngest student ever to pass the aggregation exam in philosophy, and thus became the youngest philosophy teacher in France. This would also be the year she met the famed philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, forming a relationship that would shape the rest of her life. Her lifelong relationship with Jean-Paul was also a playwright and novelist, overshadowed her work, and some would say was very destructive for her. It's almost impossible to mention one without the other. Their relationship was not traditional in any way, and they never married, lived together, nor had children. But they did share lovers. She was a very complex and ever-evolving philosopher and writer who sometimes harshly critiqued her own ideas and writings as she experienced life and matured. She wrote fiction and nonfiction, as well as essays and short stories. Her writings, teachings, and activism make her a positive force in the co-construction of a global society, especially for women. But what did Simone de Beauvoir have to say that was so meaningful, so inspiring? First of all, she helped inspire the activists of the women's liberation movement with her book, The Second Sex. Published in French in 1949, it was a significant figure in the 20th century feminist movement. The 972-page book, which analyzes reasons why women's role in society was characterized as inferior to men, was received with great controversy. Some critics characterized the book as pornography, and the Vatican placed it on the index of forbidden books. This was her most famous and influential book, and many believe it laid the groundwork for the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s. It became a source book of modern feminism, particularly in the U.S., for later feminist thinkers such as Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem. The Second Sex gave the women's movement the vocabulary for analyzing the social constructions of femininity and the structure for critiquing those constructions. Although she did not consider herself a feminist at the time of the writing of the book, she did publicly announce in an interview in 1972 and was a strong proponent of the women's movement. Next, to Beauvoir, women's rights and human rights were inseparable. Simone, along with some of her colleagues, spoke out against the French government and their oppression of the Algerians, who were trying to win their independence. In Manifesto of the 121, Beauvoir, her companion Sartre, and others opposing the Algerian War, pled with French soldiers to desert their post and refuse to be complicit in the oppression and torture of the Algerian people. This angered many French people. De Beauvoir did not care what they thought of her. All she saw was a violation of human rights by the French government, and she wanted it stopped. She wanted France to give the Algerians their independence. Her position led her to retreat to hiding for 2 years due to death threats. Due to her strong views on human rights, in 2008, the Simone de Beauvoir Prize was established in her name. It is an international human rights prize for women's freedoms awarded since 2008 to individuals or groups fighting for gender equality and opposing breaches of human rights. Last, Simone de Beauvoir was a radical supporter of abortion. Rather than settling into a quiet retirement at age 62, she was prompted by a petition to sign and lend her support to the cause. Her office was transformed to their headquarters, and she became the first president of the Choice Association. Their goals were to make contraception more readily available, to have laws making abortion illegal repealed, and to assume the cost to defend women who were accused of having an abortion. To further support the cause, she signed the Manifesto of the 343 in 1971, a list of famous women who claimed to have had an abortion, which was then illegal in France. Some argue most of the women had not had abortions, including Beauvoir. But given the secrecy surrounding the issue, this cannot be known. It only took the organization 5 years for the Veil Act, legalizing abortion, to be passed. This was a huge step for women, yet again, towards freedoms. Some questioned De Beauvoir's lifestyle, and it did indeed get her in some trouble. Beauvoir was known to have many female lovers. Some of these lovers were students, while she was a professor. In 1943, De Beauvoir was suspended from her teaching position due to the accusation that she had seduced a 17-year-old student. The student's parents pressed charges, and Beauvoir's teaching license was permanently revoked in France. Another student, Bianca Bienenfeld, stated a similar complaint in a memoir after leaving the school and marrying. Indeed, she and Jean-Paul Sartre developed a pattern which they called the trio, in which Beauvoir would seduce her students and then pass them on to Sartre. Both he and she later regretted what they viewed as their responsibility for psychological damage caused to Bienenfeld when they both rejected her. Beauvoir's independence and non-traditional lifestyle were simply not accepted in the 30s and 40s. Was she preying on these students, or were they willing participants in a love triangle? There were no arrests. Bianca Bienenfeld even found Beauvoir after the war and struck up a friendship again. The two had lunch together at least once a month until Simone's death. Clearly, this young woman accepted her role in the triangle. Beauvoir's sexual trysts and liaisons were secondary to her intellect, writings, and accomplishments for women's rights movements in France and in the U.S. In her final years, she became reclusive, surrounded by books and papers in her apartment. After Sartre's death, Simone said, "His death separates us. My death will reunite us." Even when she was a realist and not a romantic. On April 14, 1986, Simone died of pulmonary edema. She was buried next to Sartre in a cemetery 6 years to the day after Sartre passed on April 19th. It was Simone's pioneering efforts that brought many changes in women's conditions. She proved a woman could be independent and educated like a man and still find love and happiness. Her philosophies from the second sex made women's studies an intricate part of her university teaching. She proved she did not have to live the life society deemed appropriate to be intelligent, independent, self-confident, and admired by many. Simone fought for human rights, for every human to have basic freedoms and live their lives as they want. Her life is a statement and testament to her values. She never gave in to society. She was a strong, independent woman whose writings, teachings, and activism made her a positive force in the co-construction of a global society, especially for human rights, and these effects will linger.